Well, good morning. Today we're going to talk about Buddhism for Eastern philosophy. And I have to do it like this for now, and hopefully I can adjust it later. But if not, this is what we get. So I got this from several books, but in this slide I said that, Buddhism is not a religion or a philosophy, but a way of experiencing reality. And there are some classes that I taught, and there are a couple adults who just said, well, Buddhism is a religion and Buddhism is a philosophy. But I just like to include that to say it's not exclusively one or the other. It's just a guide to experiencing reality. The founder is Siddhartha Gautama. And let's look at this slide for a little bit, because what I want you to notice is how, what do you notice about his face? Hopefully you notice it's very relaxed. And the eyes are closed because any interpretation of reality has to be intrinsic. It has to come from within. It can't be at some external force. And so peace and enlightenment have to come from within. So it's an inner quiet and inner peace. And that's what his eyes are kind of suggesting. And again, it's very purposeful that his face looks rested and does not look stressed, because that's where the calm comes from. This is from a particular statue in Thailand. And I don't know if you can really notice this, but his head shaved, you get that. And notice how the light kind of comes down on his head to demonstrate enlightenment, and that's a part of Eastern philosophy, to have that enlightenment. The fact that it looks like he had gauges in his ears and then it's kind of let go. It's kind of tough to explain, but in some beliefs, especially around India, prior to even Buddhism, to experience some physical pain is a way to have more intrinsic strength. It's a way to get more in touch with some kind of higher power, in this case, enlightenment for the Buddhas. And this is the Dalai Lama. I was so confused when I first started reading about this, because in a book that I read of the Dalai Lama, he says, if anybody wants to practice Buddhism, what you want to do is you want to start with an authentic, genuine smile. Because externally, sometimes we can smile and we can have political smiles. There can be condescending smiles, polite smiles, sarcastic smiles. But what he would encourage is, on a really internal level, that if you can cultivate kind of inner peace, inner joy, inner serenity, that's what comes out. And I think he's kind of mastered it personally. I think he's adorable. 3 symbols that you'll need to know for Buddhism are the 8-spoked wheel, which will be the Eightfold Path, the lotus flower, and the symbols of the Buddha himself. Now, if you'll notice in this particular symbol of Buddha, it's the same gesture. The eyes are closed, the face is relaxed. He's in a meditative position. But remember, meditation for Buddhism is really just to get closer to the truth of reality. In Western cultures, sometimes we see the Buddha as having a big belly and laughing. And that's another kind of almost a form of Buddhism. And he doesn't have a big belly because he's fat. It's supposed to be symbolic of having that inner joy or that inner truth. The texts for Buddhism are called the Tripitaka, and they're spindles. And what like Tibetan Buddhists will do, for example, is these spindles are all over the land. And if I can find the video, I'll try to link it. All over the land, all over their monasteries. And what's written on them are intentions. So you would want to say, like, today my intention is to cultivate honesty or fortitude. And that's kind of and then you spin it, and it's this idea that we're constantly in motion. We're never, ever stuck. And so even their texts represent this continuous form of life. Now, the biggest things are going to be the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And if you really want to know the truth, if you just know these 2 basic tenets of Buddhism, this is a philosophy that lasts people a lifetime. And the 4 Noble Truths are, well, I want to go back, and I'm just going to say this, because this is what I would do in the classroom. Let's say, okay, I'm going to say the Four Noble Truths. I don't want you to take any notes. I just want you to listen. And so the Four Noble Truths are: suffering exists. We create our own suffering through attachments. There's a way out, and follow the Eightfold Path. And so those are the Four Noble Truths. Now just pause the video for a minute and see if you can remember those. Not from, again, looking at your notes or memorizing it, but what sits with you. So I'll go over them with you again. Suffering exists. Is that true? Is part of life suffering? And suffering doesn't have to be extreme. It can be suffering from, maybe not getting enough sleep one night, or losing your keys. And I know that those are big deals, but there's all kinds of forms of suffering. According to Buddhism, they're saying we create our own suffering because of our attachments. When we become attached to things that we think give us value and meaning, then the item itself becomes more valuable than the reality or truth behind it. I struggled with this one a lot because of what I was kind of going through at the time. But even with people, sometimes we have this expectation of who people should or shouldn't be in our lives, and we hold on to that. We attach ourselves to almost a myth, almost like a fantasy of what life should be like, instead of realizing that that's actually creating more suffering, because we're attached to something that isn't true and isn't real. And so it kind of becomes our problem, and we create kind of suffering on top of suffering. An example of that might be, I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Typical. Anyway, I know what I was going to say. So, like, to accept our situation as it is, right here, right now, and not attach ourselves to something that we think it should or shouldn't be again. And what I think is interesting is, let's say, for example, instead of being kind of in the moment right now, like this is our reality, if we're spending time focusing on, well, what's May going to look like? What's June going to look like? What's my college going to look like? How are my family, my grandparents going to do this? We're actually creating more suffering on top of our suffering by worrying about expectations that we don't know are going to unfold yet. And so the third of the Four Noble Truths is there's a way out of it, of this almost pointless, unnecessary suffering. And the fourth tenet is by following the Eightfold Path. So now let's look at those. They're written in different ways, but that's kind of how I explained it. And I'm going to do the same thing with the Eightfold Path. So let's do this together. The Eightfold Path, I want you to think of 3, 3, and 2. So the first 3 is the Eightfold Path are 8 ways that you can interpret truth or try to seek for truth. And so the first 3 are going to be true. You're going to see like right knowledge or right thinking. But the translation is actually, are your thoughts true? Sometimes our thoughts can get away on this kind of crazy train of, oh my gosh, and that's what that person thinks of me, etc. And sometimes we can just check in with ourselves and say, is that really a truth? Because sometimes our minds can go into, some of these places that might not be the truth, and that's what Buddhists kind of seek for or search for. So the right thinking, right vision, right speech, action, livelihood, effort, concentration, and meditation. So let's go through this one more time. We could talk about each one, or we can maybe discuss it later. Pay attention to your thoughts. Is what you're looking at the truth? Are you using truthful words? Are your actions honest? Livelihood might pertain to like your job. And if you're in a job that you love and it's a truth for you, then that's kind of the idea of livelihood. Effort, to put honest effort into at least most things that you do. And then concentration, concentrating on one thing at a time. I still struggle with that. And then meditation is really that closing your eyes and listening for your inner truths. Okay. So those are the Four Noble Truths, and that's the Eightfold Path. And again, the words are translated differently, but instead of right, you might want to think about the word truth. Don't worry about that one. Two of their customs are meditation and mandalas. And it'd be fun if you want to look some of these up. That's a sand mandala, and that one happens to be maybe 10 feet in diameter. And starting from the center, those are all pieces of colored sand. And what they do is they concentrate and meditate on this beautiful mandala. And while they're doing it, they're not going to be distracted because they want to put their good intentions, this idea of putting good intentions back out into the world. And if you're doing it yourself as a practice, then the idea is it can go out there. And what they do when they're finished with this mandala, no matter how big it is, this could be as big as a living room, then they take it away and they ceremoniously sweep it kind of back into life. So it's like not only are their intentions there, but you want to pass that on and not get attached to the artwork, not get attached to your hard work as it's a beautiful piece of art, but to say everything is impermanent. So don't get attached to things because it's all going to go. I kind of like that. And then, let's see the next one. They're really, they love to focus on the Bodhi tree. And I'll just let you meditate on that one. A lot of the meditation places are out in nature. Women can be monks as well. They do shave their heads. These are some yoga poses, which is actually poses from Bikram yoga, which has got a lot of nasty attention lately. So might want to change that slide. Always remember that we talk about these philosophies with ending with the common thread of the golden rule. And happy children. So I'm going to post something else, but hopefully this goes through and I can try to fix it. Hope you have some questions and you want to talk about this more. Ciao.